Get into the action all summer long. Listen to that. Summer.
Woo!
The season's over. The NHL season's over. The NBA season's over. But there's still lots happening at Sports Interaction, including we got the draft coming up. We got free agency coming up for both of those sports, plus tennis, golf, whatever it is you're into, baseball, all happening right now at sportsinteraction.com/SDPN.
You can bet on those things. You can bet on free agency and draft.
Exactly. And we're going to actually throw a bunch of props up in the Dangles Doozy section as well. And remember, everything's you can do before games, live and play all summer long. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN or download the app to get started. It's 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Move on, because there are other huge pieces of news that broke yesterday, including Michael Andlauer becoming the 90% owner of the Ottawa Senators. The rest of the 10% is split between a few people. I believe a local businessman by the last name of Malhotra, and I didn't know if there was any connection to Manny Malhotra.
I was wondering that too,
but because it's a distinct name. Just rolls off the tongue too. But Steve Dangle broke some news, guys.
Sort of.
Steve Dangle. Not a huge surprise, but I'm hearing Steve Staios to the Sens for a role, likely as GM. Andlauer once hired Staios away from the Leafs to join the Hamilton Bulldogs.
Right. So
Steve, insider man, Dangle.
So there's a few things there. Number one, I do not take that back. That's what I was told. That's what I believe. I'm confident in that information.
Okay.
If I could do it again, I would have sat on it for a little bit because I think I mistakenly gave people the impression this was going to happen soon.
Yeah.
It's not. As Darren Dreger reported, Steve Staios is still working with the Edmonton Oilers on their draft right now.
Yep.
Pierre Dorion is still the GM in Ottawa. I haven't heard anything regarding
poor
him.
Pierre too, because he's
I know
had to eat shit for so many years, and now it's like, hey, things are gonna be good. Bye.
I haven't heard that he's leaving, so like I could easily see him surviving this. Like he's been fired on Twitter like how many times?
Oh yeah,
you know. So there are a lot of moving parts here. Steve Staios is still with the Oilers. Pierre Dorion is still with the Ottawa Senators, and most importantly, the Andlauer Group will not take control of the Ottawa Senators for another few months. I believe September.
Yeah, he still has to sell 10% of the Montreal Canadiens, which he owns. He was a lifelong Habs fan.
Yeah.
Lives in Toronto, of course.
Of course.
I actually did a little deep dive on him and read a bunch of articles. So he was born in France, but his family moved to Quebec. And he said, like, he comes from nothing, this Andlauer guy. Nothing.
Wow.
He dropped out of university and worked at McCain Foods in Toronto in their delivery administration. And he had studied business administration at York University. And I guess he launched his own trucking company in his mid-20s. And they were the company, it's called ATS Healthcare, Andlauer Transportation Services. And they're the ones that were moving the COVID vaccine across the country.
No way.
Wow.
So he had all the refrigerated trucks.
Yeah.
He's the one that was getting it to all the like Shoppers Drug Marts or whatever.
So we can't trust him.
Yeah, that's right.
He's in with Gates and the chips in our brain.
That's right. That's right. That which means Gary is now.
Yeah,
too,
but think of how good.
League.
Think of how good the player tracking is going to be, though.
That's true.
Forgetting the jersey, it's right in the bloodstream.
He also turned around the Hamilton Bulldogs. Within a couple of years of buying them, he turned them into a profitable organization, and they won the Calder Cup, which means nothing.
The Calder Cup means nothing.
And then, of course, he bought a minority stake, in the Montreal Canadiens, which is the Bulldogs were the affiliate for the Montreal Canadiens, and that has been the same ever since.
Yeah. So it's possible still that Pierre Dorion is, well, I think it's likely actually that Pierre Dorion is the GM in Ottawa by the end of the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Is the day Andlauer takes over, maybe Dorion gets fired and he brings in Staios from Edmonton. It is still possible that Dorion maybe does the whole season for Ottawa. But I think the long-term goal, the writing is on the wall, that it'll be Staios in the organization, probably as GM. If not as GM, then some other role.
Interesting.
Very interesting. Okay.
Just for clarity, too, Adam, you mentioned he has a 90% stake in the Malhotra family. So the Malhotra family is a part of his 90% stake.
Oh, they are.
10% is the Melnick family in the deal
the trust.
retains 10%. So his daughters, they still own 10% of the deal. And one thing that was holding it up was there was a whole bunch of asks from the Melnick side that we're starting to learn about. And one of them was that if Andlauer was ever to sell again, that they want to maintain their 10%. So even if he sells pieces, like their 10% is always going to stay 10%. And there's a lot of contention going back and forth about that. And also them wanting Andlauer to pay their capital gains tax on the deal.
Eat shit.
And them
Your capital gains is 25%. Go fuck
and
yourself.
them being told, no, that's not how this works. Because Eugene Melnick bought this franchise for under, what was that?
It was like 90 million or something, wasn't it?
It's I think it was $93 million.
Yeah.
If I remember the number correctly. So $93 million, and today it sells for $950 million. So your capital gains on that are
It's $250 million.
$800 million.
Well, no, your capital gains, yes.
Yeah, so
5% of that.
So your capital gains on that are $800 million, and you have to pay a tax of 25% on that capital gains tax. And then they were like, we don't want to pay this. Let's try and get these guys to pay it. Yeah. And Andlauer said, no, that's your problem.
Well, so what's interesting about that too, and the reason they would have wanted that is apparently, and I have yet to see this confirmed, there was a ton of debt with the Senators. Like hundreds of millions of dollars of debt that the Senators were in. That's what I've been hearing. And so what would happen is you got to pay that debt back, but it doesn't matter that your capital gain was against that, right? Like there is still a gigantic. So I think, listen, the Melnick Trust is still going to walk away with $200 or $300 million, but I've heard extremely high numbers in terms of the amount of debt this wipes out for them. And when you make that purchase, then you could pay your lenders back. But it's an ugly number, that plus the tax. You think that the Melnick Trust is going to walk away? Oh, they just get $950 million. I would be shocked if it was a third of that. I'd be shocked.
Nah, and you're missing
still a lot of money.
You're missing a pretty juicy part. Is supposedly as part of this, I want to say this was Bruce Garriock. Andlauer supposedly put an ultimatum like, "Hey, either we get this deal done today or I'm out." Or by Tuesday, whatever it was.
And this is the thing, is he was the preferred partner because he's been a minority shareholder in the Montreal Canadiens for how many years? Andlauer, the reason this process took so long is because Gary wanted Andlauer. He trusts him. Gary's been taken to the cleaners over some of the ownership situations, the Jim Balsillie, the Boots Del Biagio. Like some of these guys were literal, like one of them was like, didn't have the money. And several of the bidders in this process didn't have the money. But one of them was like a criminal, straight up criminal, did not like faked having the money. I think it's Nashville that he bought. And so Gary is extremely careful with this. He knows Andlauer, he trusts Andlauer, he knows he's got a thriving business. But Michael Andlauer was like, okay, well, you want me to be the owner of this team and I'm interested, but why would I move off of my price if I'm your preferred candidate? So it was getting him up over the $900 million mark because the NHL wants to say we sold him for $1 billion. They didn't, but they want to say that.
And in the end, there was only 4 bids. Amongst all the drama that we had over the last couple of months in Ottawa and all these people interested, it came down to four groups, and a couple of them that they're still unsure if the financing ever would have come through. So it wasn't as crazy of a bidding war. It was just more drama behind the scenes and just people dropping out and coming through.
Here's what's interesting, though. I always say when teams go for like a number one center at the trade deadline and then someone else gets them, do they just go, oh, well, I guess we just won't get one? No, they try to go out and get another one.
Yeah.
So all these different groups tried to buy the Ottawa Senators. What do they try to buy next?
An expansion basketball franchise in Las Vegas.
There you go.
That's how you make it happen.
Or an expansion hockey team in Houston. Or an expansion hockey team in Atlanta, which I think would work today.
It is going to work. They're going back. They're going back. I don't know why anybody thinks it won't work in Atlanta. Of course it'll work. They were idiots the last time they did the Thrashers expansion. If you go back and look at the expansion rules that Columbus, Nashville, Atlanta, and Minnesota had to go through, they were so draconian that none of those teams ended up with NHL caliber teams. And it took them 5 to 7 years to dig themselves out of that hole. Atlanta never had a chance. And it's remarkable that, I mean, Minnesota was a prime market anyway. The NHL should have never left Minnesota. Stupid. Columbus, it's great that it's worked so well. Nashville, for a lot of people, was a surprise, although one of the best fan bases in the league. Atlanta should have worked. But they had terrible ownership and made terrible decisions. That's going to work this time, and it'll be back in the next 5 years.
So this illustrates, one, how bad the expansion Atlanta Thrashers were, and two, how awful the dead puck era was. Ugh. For the Atlanta Thrashers, their leading scorer in both goals and points, Andrew Brunette, with 23 goals.
What year is this?
This is 99-2000. 23 goals, 50 points.
Mm-hmm. I always drafted him as a third line center in my fantasy NHL.
Third line. Their second leading scorer in goals and points, Ray Ferraro.
Hey!
With 19 goals and 44 points. Then only two more players hit 30 points. Nelson Emerson and Yannick Tremblay.
I liked Nelson Emerson. He was a good player.
Good player.
I want to throw this out there.
Just on the Thrashers, they spent 99 to 2011 in Atlanta. They made the playoffs once.
Yeah.
And they got swept.
Just awful. How do you expect to build a team or a fan base when you get 14 wins in your first year and you don't make the playoffs for your first 1 to 6 years, and then you make one time and then you're never in the playoffs again?
And they had good players roll through town, but never all at the same time.
No. It was a horrendous way to try and build a franchise, and the NHL did a disservice there, and they didn't have the best owners either.
Because Gary wasn't good at picking owners.
Yeah, and if they take another stab at it, it's going to be great.
I want to throw this out.
That's a Hall of Famer.
I want to throw this out there. Andrew Brunette, by the way, is one of the only players from that era to have played for all 4 expansion teams. He started with Nashville, then went to Atlanta, then went to Minnesota, then a few years in Colorado where he had an 83-point year, and then ended off his career with the Minnesota Wild and a few games for the Blackhawks. I just thought that was a neat stat.